People are always asking me where the outlook is good, but that is the wrong question. The right question is, where is the outlook most miserable? So, my uncle always had a desk plate in his office that simply read, "Trouble is opportunity." And we have had those replicated and have them in my office as well. It's a really good reminder of his investment philosophy. Now, market corrections and crashes are a staple to the market. They're going to happen. It's not if, it's when. So since 1900, there have been 125 corrections. Corrections are defined as a drawdown of 10% or more peak to trough. There have been 32 bear markets defined as a 20% drawdown or more peak to trough. So you're going to spend about 1/3 of your life in bear markets. Bear markets come along every 3 to 3.5 years. Corrections come along every year. Really good investors have learned to harness the power of the bear market to boost their returns for years to come. That's really what distinguishes an average investor from a great investor. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this term, Homo Economicus. It's actually an academic term used to define man as a perfectly rational wealth maximizer with the infinite capacity for rational decision making. I mean, do you think Homo Economicus exists? I don't. And despite that, Homo Economicus is used all the time in finance and economics. So most of Western philosophy and academia preaches Plato's mind-body split and the predominance of rational thinking. Students in business school are taught to calculate risk using standard deviation and beta, and Homo Economicus really supports this model. But value investors say, no, we don't buy that. You know, intrinsic value often differs from price. Risk is simply paying too much for a security. And really, the returns bear this out. The returns support a value investor's perspective. Here we have a graph showing the 20-year annualized returns by asset class. And as you can see, stocks had returned 9.9%, bonds 6.2%, gold 5.8%, oil 5.6%, international stocks 5%, and homes 3.1%. The average investor, 2.5%. Now, how is that possible if all these asset classes outperform the average investor? It's because people are really terrible decision makers, and they're oftentimes buying high and selling low. Now, I'm a really good Southern girl, and I was raised on a diet of BLTs. But in my family, we called them Buffett, Lynch, and Templetons. These are three of the greatest investors and their track records, and they are remarkable. I think one thing to highlight is that Warren Buffett has an incredible vehicle for investing. Peter Lynch and Sir John both manage mutual funds. Mutual funds are terrible vehicles for the manager because people are always giving you money at the wrong time and taking it away at the wrong time. So they're very, very difficult to manage. And this is a really important point. So Peter Lynch, when he was annualizing 29%, conducted a study, and he wanted to know what the average investor in Magellan had earned. And what he found was that the average investor had earned 5%, and many had actually lost money. He was annualizing 29%. So again, investors are constantly doing the wrong thing. When a manager runs up, they give them money. When the manager draws down, they take it away. And that's how the average investor earned 5% or lost money when the product they were investing in was annualizing 29%. Now, this is something I want you to remember. What is a really easy way you could have outperformed Buffett, Lynch, or Templeton sitting at home in your pajamas eating potato chips? Well, the way you could have done it is you would have simply added money every time they had drawn down. Arithmetically, you would have a higher return than these managers. So investing can be very complex, but it can also be very simple. And I always tell our investors when they walk through the door, this is a partnership. I am a tool in your toolbox. But if you give me money after I've had a big run up and you take it away when I draw down, together we're going to produce a really poor return. So the investor has some responsibility in this. If you're not good at controlling yourself, you should use a dollar cost averaging program or something like that to remove your emotions from that process. But I think that's really, really important to remember. So you can invest with the best manager in the world, but if you can't control yourself and you're constantly putting in money at the wrong time and taking it away at the wrong time, you're going to have really poor returns. And you all have an excuse for your lousy investment returns. That should make you feel pretty good. There's a biological reason for this. So researchers at the University of Pennsylvania have found that the human retina can process 10 million bits of information per second. This is about the capacity of an Ethernet connection. Your other senses add about 1 million more bits of information per second. So the total bandwidth of the human brain is about 11 million bits of information per second. But the human, only about 40 bits of information make it to the human conscious. So the way the brain works is it's typically taking this information in and processing it in a region known as the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is involved in decision making, complex cognitive behaviors, self-control, but it's very analytic, and it's a very slow part of your brain. So when you think of the brain, you can think of the brain as sort of taking in information through a fire hydrant, and the prefrontal cortex is like a slow, leaky faucet dripping out. Now, when your eyes and ears sense danger, or if you turn on CNBC and the market's crashing and they've always got this fabulous music playing in the background to really heighten your anxiety, the problem is that your brain bypasses the prefrontal cortex and sends information to an area called the amygdala. And the amygdala controls your fight or flight response. And the amygdala is a much faster processes information much faster. And to do so, it relies on something called mental shortcuts, or behavioral finance experts call this heuristics. And it's these mental shortcuts that oftentimes get investors into a lot of trouble when they're investing. But some of the best examples, or my favorite examples, often occur in Vegas. So people have the tendency to segregate money based on use, even though all dollars are created equal. And they treat those dollars very differently. And there's also something called the found money effect. So I think the most interesting observation of this is in Vegas when an investor walks in and plops down $1,000. And let's say they do really well and they win $500. That investor will do totally different things with the money. So with the original $1,000 they come with, they may pay their mortgage or their phone bill, but that $500, that found money effect, they may go buy a new expensive pocketbook, or they go out to a fancy restaurant they normally wouldn't dine at. And that's why all these shops exist around Vegas. And they've actually videotaped people in Vegas. And this effect is so strong that some people actually will put the money in separate pockets. So the money they came in goes in this pocket, the money they won goes in this pocket. The other really fascinating example of this in sort of the real world is the lottery. I was actually at my local Rotary Club one day, and somebody came in to speak to us about the Tennessee lottery and the history of it. And when they first started the lottery in Tennessee, it was not popular at all. They did not sell many tickets. And then somebody came up with a brilliant idea of letting people pick the numbers to go on their ticket. And sales exploded. It was the illusion of control. So had the probability increased that these individuals would win the lottery? No, not at all. But they felt like they had more control over it. And this happens in the market all the time. My dad has always told me, Lauren, don't confuse genius with a bull market. So you make some money and you think, hey, I'm really smart. You know, I've really got some control over the outcome of this next trade I'm going to put on. You start to take on more and more risk. And that's how bubbles start to happen in the financial markets.